Let me give it to you straight. Nobody cares about you. Not the way you think they should. Not the way you want them to. You can sit there and wait for someone to notice your struggle, wait for someone to come along and feel sorry for you, or you can wake up to the truth and get to work. The world isn't heartless, it's just busy. People have their own battles, their own bills, their own breakdowns. They're not ignoring you out of cruelty, they're just living. So what do? You stop waiting for the world to care and you start caring enough about yourself to take charge. You start showing up even when no one's clapping. You start grinding even when no one sees, because here's the deal. The moment you produce value, people start to notice. The world doesn't owe you anything. It never did, and it never will. That may sound harsh, but it's one of the most liberating truths you can ever embrace. See, too many people walk around with the idea that just because they were born, just because they've gone through hardship, or just because they have potential, the world should reward them. But life doesn't operate on sympathy, it operates on results. If you want something, you must go get it. Not because it's owed to you, but because you earned it. Entitlement is dangerous. It steals drive, it kills creativity, and it makes people bitter. You can't walk into life with your hand out. You've got to walk in with your sleeves rolled up, ready to do the work. Your name doesn't guarantee you anything. Your past doesn't entitle you to a future. Pain doesn't equal progress unless you do something with it. And that's where people get stuck. They think their story should be enough. But the world isn't looking for a story. It's looking for what you can do, what you can create, what you can solve, and what you can bring to the table. Nobody cares about what you were supposed to be. Life responds to effort, discipline, growth, and value. You don't get a standing ovation for surviving, only for rising and delivering. Now, does that mean your journey doesn't matter? Not at all. Your journey matters deeply to you. But just because you've been through something doesn't mean people will line up to reward you for it. The moment you understand that, the moment you stop expecting a handout, you become free. Free to grow, free to push, free to rise without resentment. This mindset shift is powerful. When you stop expecting the world to give you a break and start demanding more from yourself, everything changes. You move from victim to victor. You stop hoping and start building. You stop waiting for opportunity and begin creating it. You stop begging for attention and start earning respect. Now here's the twist. While the world doesn't owe you anything, it will respond to you. If you bring value, it opens doors. If you become excellent, it takes notice. If you solve problems, it rewards you. But that only happens after you stop thinking you're owed and start becoming someone worth watching. No one's coming to save you. No one's handing you a golden ticket. But if you show up with consistency, with value, with grit, you'll get everything you are willing to work for. So the world doesn't owe you anything. And that's good news. Because that means your future doesn't depend on handouts, luck, or anyone else's permission. It depends on you, your hunger, your hustle, your ability to rise. Responsibility is your superpower. It may not sound exciting, it may not glitter like talent or charm, but it's the one trait that separates those who move forward from those who stay stuck. The moment you take full responsibility for your life, not just the good parts, but the painful, frustrating, and even unfair parts, you unlock a kind of power that most people never access. Why? Because most people are too busy blaming, too busy pointing fingers, too busy waiting for someone else to fix what only they can control. You don't get stronger by avoiding responsibility. You get stronger by carrying it. When you own your choices, your reactions, and your results, you take control of your life. You stop being a passenger and start driving. People who blame everything on their parents, their boss, the economy, or the government are giving away their power. They're handing their life over to someone else's decisions. But the people who say, I am where I am because of what I've allowed, what I've tolerated, what I've built or neglected, those are the people who can change things. Because what you claim, you can change. What you run from, you're stuck with. Responsibility doesn't mean everything is your fault. That's not the point. It means everything is your opportunity. You can't control what others do. You can't control what already happened, but you can control how you respond. You can control what you do next. That's where all your power is, in the next move. And people forget that. They think responsibility is a burden. But the truth is, It's the only way out of being stuck. It's the only way to build real confidence. Because once you realize you are in charge of your own life, there's no more waiting, no more hoping. You start doing. If your finances are a mess, take responsibility. If your health is failing, take responsibility. If your relationships are toxic, take responsibility. Not because you're to blame for everything, but because you're the only one who can turn it around. As long as it's someone else's fault, you're powerless. But the second it's your responsibility, now you can act, adjust, grow, improve. This is the mindset of every successful person. They don't waste time complaining. They don't wait for the perfect conditions. They look in the mirror and say, it's on me. That level of ownership builds momentum. And once you have momentum, you become unstoppable. Life becomes less about what happens to you and more about what you're building every single day. When you stop outsourcing responsibility and start claiming your role in your own story, everything changes. You become focused. You become intentional. You stop living by default and start living by design. And that's where transformation begins. Not in the excuses, not in the blame, but in the quiet, powerful decision to take ownership of your life. People care when you produce results. That might sting a little, but it's the truth. People may smile at potential, they may nod at effort, but they show up, they pay attention, they invest when you deliver. In the real world, results speak louder than stories, intentions, or excuses. That's not cold, it's reality. And once you understand that, you stop chasing applause for trying and start building the kind of results that command respect. You see, people are wired to respond to value. You become valuable not when you talk about what you're going to do, but when you actually do it. Not when you say you're working hard, but when your work creates outcomes that impact others. That's when doors open. That's when networks grow. That's when opportunities start to find you. Because the world doesn't reward activity. It rewards effectiveness. And if you want to be noticed, if you want to be respected, if you want to lead, then you have to produce. Results earn you the right to speak. They give you credibility. You don't need to beg for attention when you're creating value. You don't need to explain yourself when your performance is obvious. And this is the big shift. Once you stop seeking approval and start building results, people begin to pay attention on their own. Not because you asked, but because you've become undeniable. Now, does that mean people don't care about your journey or your struggles? Not exactly, but their interest is usually tied to what you've built from that struggle. Everyone has a story. What matters is what you did with yours. Pain is common, but progress is rare. And that's what separates the respected from the forgotten. Not what they went through, but how they used it to create something real. You could be the most talented person in the room, the most educated, the most passionate, but if you don't deliver, eventually people stop listening. Talent unproven fades. Passion without results becomes noise. You want to be different? Show what you can do. Let your actions talk. Let your impact speak. People care when they can see the difference you make. Not when you say you're going to win, but when you cross the finish line. Not when you talk about your goals, but when you turn those goals into achievements. The good news is you don't need to be the smartest, the fastest, or the most gifted. You just need to become someone who delivers consistently, quietly, relentlessly. That's how trust is built. That's how leadership is formed. That's how reputations are made. Not through promises, but through proof. People may doubt your dreams, but they cannot ignore your results. They can overlook your effort, but they can't deny your outcomes. So if you want the world to care, don't just tell them who you are, show them what you've built. That's what gets attention. That's what gets remembered. Self-pity destroys progress. It's one of the most seductive traps in life because it feels justified. When things go wrong, when life feels unfair, when you've given your best and still come up short, self-pity whispers, you deserve to feel this way. It's not your fault, just sit here a little longer. And before you know it, days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and progress comes to a dead stop. Because self-pity doesn't help you heal, it holds you hostage. You can't move forward and feel sorry for yourself at the same time. The energy you need to build, to rise, to create self-pity drains it. It takes your focus off solutions and locks it onto the problem. It magnifies what went wrong and minimizes what's still possible. And the worst part, It convinces you that the world should pause until you feel better. But the world doesn't stop. Life keeps moving. Opportunity keeps passing. And while you're sitting in your feelings, someone else is out there doing something about theirs. Self-pity feels like comfort, but it's a comfort that costs you everything. It robs you of your power, because when you pity yourself, you give your circumstances control. You surrender the fight. You stop trying and you start waiting for someone to notice, for something to change, for a break that may never come. But here's the truth. No one is coming to rescue you from your own mind. If you want out, you have to climb. If you want change, you have to choose. That doesn't mean you don't acknowledge your pain. It doesn't mean you fake strength or deny what you've been through. But there's a difference between feeling pain and feeding it. Growth doesn't come from marinating in misery. It comes from making moves even when you're hurting. You can cry and still continue. You can be wounded and still work. You don't wait for the pain to leave before you move forward. You move forward through the pain. People who succeed in life aren't immune to setbacks. They're just immune to staying stuck. They don't allow hard times to become a permanent identity. They feel the hit, they take the lesson, and then they get back to building. Self-pity would keep them down, but discipline, vision, and purpose pull them back up, because they understand something most people miss. The longer you stay in that dark place, the harder it becomes to leave. So they refuse to sit in it. They refuse to live in blame or bitterness or why me. You want to grow? Drop the story that keeps you powerless. You want to rise? Stop rehearsing the reasons you're stuck. You want real freedom? Let go of the pity party and get back to the work. Because progress doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It waits for you to decide, to act, to rise in spite of everything. That's the mindset that changes lives. Not feel bad for me, but watch what I do next. Winners don't wait for sympathy. They don't sit around hoping someone will feel sorry for them, understand their pain, or rescue them from the weight of their responsibilities. They don't rely on pity as fuel. They rely on discipline, vision, and relentless action. Because they understand that sympathy may feel good temporarily, but it does nothing to move you forward. It doesn't build businesses, fix habits, or create success. It only soothes your pain while your potential sits untouched. Life doesn't reward those who cry the loudest. It rewards those who get up the quickest. The winners in this world have experienced loss, disappointment, betrayal, and failure, just like everyone else. But instead of broadcasting their pain in hopes of gaining attention, they channel it, they use it. They turn it into drive, hunger, and focus. They learn early on that sympathy doesn't solve problems. Work does, strategy does, grit does. Sympathy is reactive, it waits for someone to notice. But winners are proactive. They don't need the world to validate their hurt to make a move. They already know pain is part of the process. They don't need applause to show up. They don't need a cheering squad to stay committed. Because their motivation doesn't come from the outside, it comes from their purpose. It comes from knowing who they want to become, what they're building, and why it matters. The problem with waiting for sympathy is that it keeps you dependent. It conditions you to believe that someone else's comfort is necessary for your next step. But the moment you start needing sympathy, you stop postponing responsibility. You stop asking, what can I do? And start asking, why isn't anyone helping me? And that question steals your power. It shrinks you. It convinces you that progress can't begin until someone else does their part. But winners never give that kind of control away. Winners move in silence. They fight battles people never hear about. They bleed behind the scenes, then show up composed. It's not because they're invincible. It's because they've made a decision. I'm not going to let this stop me. And that decision changes everything. It's what separates the average from the exceptional. Most people wait for circumstances to improve. Winners improve regardless of circumstances. Most people want understanding. Winners want results. There's a time for healing. There's a time for being vulnerable. But there's also a time to stand up, dust yourself off, and say, let's go. Sympathy can't get you to that moment. Only courage can. Only self-leadership can. The more you need people to feel bad for you, the less power you have to change your situation. But the day you say, I'm not waiting to be saved, I'm taking the lead, that's the day everything begins to shift. Because winners don't wait for sympathy, They create momentum, they find a way, they become the proof that pain doesn't have to stop progress. Turn indifference into fuel. That cold silence you hear when no one notices your effort, use it. The people who overlooked you, doubted you, ignored you, let that be the spark that lights the fire inside. Because if you wait for encouragement, you'll wait forever. If you need applause to stay consistent, you're already losing. The truth is, most people don't care until you give them a reason to. And that's not something to resent, it's something to use. Indifference is part of the process. It's the space between who you are and who you're becoming. At first, nobody sees your late nights, your discipline, your sacrifices. No one's cheering you on when you're putting in the reps, reading the books, building the vision in silence. That's the phase where most people quit, not because they couldn't succeed, but because they couldn't handle being ignored. But the ones who keep going, those are the ones who eventually get noticed, not for asking to be seen, but for becoming impossible to overlook. You don't need the world to believe in you. You need to believe in yourself enough to keep going when no one else claps. That's where champions are made. In the shadows, in the quiet places, when it's just you and your vision. Every great story begins with someone being overlooked. Every legacy starts with rejection, dismissal, and doubt. But the great ones didn't take that as a reason to stop. They turned it into fuel. They didn't get bitter, they got better. You have to use what you've got. If all you have is silence, use it. If all you hear is doubt, turn it into drive. Make it your mission to prove to yourself, not the world, that you can rise, that you can build something worthwhile without anyone's permission, that you don't need to be validated before you act. You only need one thing, purpose. And if you have that, then the indifference of others becomes irrelevant. It becomes background noise. You don't need everyone to see you now. You just need to keep moving until they can't ignore you. The people who laugh now will listen later. The ones who turned their back will turn their heads, not because you begged for their attention, but because your consistency built results they couldn't deny. But that only happens if you endure the silence, if you stay locked in, if you decide that being overlooked is not a death sentence, it's a test. And if you pass it, you don't just gain success, you gain a strength that no one can take from you. Let the world's indifference become your drive. Let it sharpen your focus, toughen your mindset, fuel your discipline. Don't waste time asking why no one cares. Use that time to become someone worth caring about. The moment you stop needing support, you become dangerous. Because now your power isn't in how others see you, it's in how you see yourself. And that's where real momentum begins.